and not the other way around. We eat to live and not live to eat. And therefore, the choice of cooking fuel embraced is of significance. Despite that, 80% of the population in Africa still use biomass fuel for cooking, despite the known harmful effect. There is therefore a need to begin thinking about how the cooking culture, which is strongly embedded in traditional ways of cooking, can be decolonized. Conversations on innovative cooking technologies such as electric pressure cooker needs to be triggered to get the discussions on clean cooking technologies going and to make sure that no one is left behind in the journey. E-cooking campaigns have to be intentional and be actively championed among the poor and the vulnerable in society, most of whom rely on dirty fuels for cooking. If that is not done, then the technology that is supposed to bring about justice will work force injustice. As we all know, climate change is among the leading systematic challenges being faced in today's world. It not only affects how we live and work, but also how we interact with the environment. As such, there is need to input efforts from all government organizations, individuals across the globe for collective action to be taken. Moreover, for meaningful investments and widespread innovation will be required to generate and store clean sources of energy, enhance the electrical grid, and improve the energy efficiency of electric cooking appliances. This will help to reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases that result from the use of biomass fuel, as well as promote the adaptation to the already witnessed impacts of climate change. Worth noting is that the benefits that stream from the investments will far outweigh the upfront cost of investing in such technologies. With that introduction, I'll take the opportunity to welcome our speakers and panelists. For our start, we have Dr. Faith Odongo. Dr. Faith Odongo is the keynote speaker, and she is the Deputy Director of the Renewable Energy Ministry of Energy, Kenya. We have Jonathan Clawes, who is the Manager, Programs and Innovation at the Carbon Trust, UK. We have Mary Mbege, the Chief Officer for Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change, Makueni County. We also have Mr. David Njugi, who is the East African Regional Representative at GOGLA here in Kenya. And last and not least, Mr. Tom Randa, who is the MEX Project Officer in Kenya and an ARIN Fellow at the same time. With that said, I'd like to welcome Mr. Paul Osogo, who is also a colleague and a MEX Project Officer, Kenya, to take us through the remaining sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Good afternoon, everybody. The first question, we will go directly to Dr. Faith Odongo. The question will be, what are the policy angles that needs to be taken into consideration to promote the adoption of clean cooking technologies? In brackets, I would say e-cooking. Dr. Faith? Trying to see if Dr. Faith is here. If Dr. Faith is not logged in, we'll go to the next panelist, Jonathan Gloves. This question will be to you. How can we attract finance, make access to finance possible to facilitate the extensive update of modern energy cooking solutions?
Hi there, everyone. Thanks for that. Yeah, happy to jump in. I think this quite literally is the $4.7 billion a year question. Just kind of wanted to start with a few kind of comments or quotes that some of you might recognize. Startup capital is especially necessary for some newer technologies. Commercial banks and MFIs are hesitant to lend to low-income consumers. We need $4.7 billion a year to reach SDG 7, but we're missing that by an order of magnitude. Carbon finance is growing, but it's risky and challenging. And I think a lot of those comments are probably going to be familiar to most of you. You probably would have read them very recently. But those are direct quotes from the State of the Global Clean and Improved Cooking Sector in 2015. And I think it's, it highlights the scale of the challenge that in the last 7 years, we're still talking about the same points. And that's not specific to clean cooking. That is a common challenge across, access to electricity, across health outcomes, across education. A lot of these challenges are still remaining. But, it's important that we keep moving forwards. We keep trying to tackle these challenges. And I think importantly, there are reasons to be optimistic, and there are opportunities to correct these challenges moving forward. Technologies are advancing at a rapid rate, and it really importantly, clean cooking continues to push higher and higher up the agenda, which is a really great thing to see. I just want to sort of boil this down to hopefully, 3 key areas to talk about. There's a lot that could be said about finance, but trying to reduce that down into something a bit more manageable. The first point is highlighting the cost of inaction and linking that to support and to impact. The second is making clean cooking investments more attractive. And the final one is ensuring we have the right kind of capital in the right places, and that includes concessional capital, results-based financing, and sort of blended support. So just to pick up on the first point about highlighting the cost of inaction, it's estimated that somewhere in the region of not meeting SDG 7, it would cost about $2.4 trillion per year in terms of health, gender, and climate negative outcomes. That is obviously a terrifyingly large number, and far dwarfs the $4.7 billion a year that the IEA estimates is needed to reach SDG 7 for clean cooking. The opportunity there is that by tackling clean cooking, there is an opportunity to have far larger impacts than just those that are direct outcomes of clean cooking. So, we're linking this here to health outcomes, to gender outcomes, to importantly expand the impact of every dollar spent on this sector. And if the sector is able to convince donors, development partners, governments that there is an opportunity here to have a larger impact for every dollar they put in, then there is the potential to attract more funding because you are using that money in a much more productive way. And importantly, I think aligning kind of nationally determined contributions to the SDGs, that's going to create strategic opportunities to attract climate and carbon finance, for gender finance, for tracking outcomes more closely. And all of that is going to be beneficial and an opportunity that people see that their money is being spent in positive ways. And importantly, to support all of that, there are methodologies out there to reduce the verification of the types of outcomes. And I think it's important that we look and push forwards with piloting ways of monetizing these other impacts, such as health. And there is a push now for results-based financing around health, around gender outcomes, that are again a huge opportunity to attract funding, as well as the opportunity to align clean cooking and nature-based solutions moving forwards. And I think the Clean Cooking Alliance had a fantastic report on that only recently. The second area then, making clean cooking investment more attractive. I read report after report that says investors need to put more money into the sector. But we can't simply ask investors to put more money into the sector. We need to show them that it is attractive for them to put their money, because they have their own demands and the need to make returns. So, and the sector is doing this, but it needs to accelerate in terms of what it's doing. So, companies, are accelerating innovation, technology, business models. They need to be able to communicate these to investors to show that they are opportunities for investment. There is the chance to grow them, and they will really sort of tackle the challenges moving forward. We need to do a better job of really ensuring that investors understand these business models, these technologies, these fuels, and ensuring that we are exposing a greater number of investors to the sector. It's the companies and the sector's responsibility to share that information with sectors and be rigorous about how they're presenting it, to ensure that the investors see the opportunities there. we need a clear route to scale as well. So what is the, after you've retracted that initial funding, what is the opportunity to scale up, and what does your funding pathway look like? From a government perspective, supporting policies, hopefully we'll hear about what some of those policies are going to be. So I won't go into depth on those, but around regulations, around VAT, duty, imports, etc. How can we lower the cost of this to make it more attractive to invest? And then importantly, we can never forget the customer. There are, numerous challenges, spoken about in clean cooking, which shows that, customers are currently, using traditional cooking methods, and we need to support them to transition away. We can't expect them to directly transition away themselves. So how are we building the actual market that these products are going to be sold into? And that is going to be one of the things that's most attractive to investors, if they see the opportunity within the market and they don't see that there are barriers to actual expansion of it. And there's a distinct opportunity there of linking clean cooking to electrification, which is obviously particularly relevant for modern energy cooking solutions. And there are numerous opportunities to hopefully attract more funding by aligning those two pieces, particularly around aligning with regulators, with utilities, as well as with existing off-grid solar companies. And then the final area, I won't go into too much detail on this one, but it's the right kind of capital. So we need concessional capital early into the sector. We need blended support across the sort of the sector in terms of debt financing, ensuring that there is first loss protection. So how can we use the initial investment into the sector to catalyze future investment? We need to be smart about where we're putting support into the sector to ensure that then brings in other investors down the line. So how can development partners play a role in ensuring that they are putting in capital that will support more private-minded or sort of private investors to bring support into the sector? And particularly that's relevant around debt investment, first loss, etc. So, what is that concessionary capital that's going in there to stimulate that sort of the clean cooking loans and growth in the sector? But I think finally, and very importantly, it's what is that clear transition pathway away from that concessional support? We can't build a sector that is 100% reliant on that. We need to understand where concessional support is most needed and targeted, ensure that that is going to the right places to ensure we're making the best use of the money that comes into the sector, and then ensuring that we are in a position to bring those private partners in to continue to grow the sector above and beyond the sort of more concessional support from development partners. There's a whole load more other stuff that I could talk about, but I'm conscious on time. But those are sort of three of the key areas that I kind of wanted to draw attention to around, what is the cost of inaction? How do we make clean cooking investments more attractive, and making sure that we're attracting the right kind of capital and spending that in the right ways? Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, for an elaborate explanation. What I've taken home on that is that we need to have the interlinkage between health and gender to clean cooking. To make it more attractive, we need funding. And in regards to that, we need government support to be able to help this space to be more attractive financially. With that, I will ask Dr. Faith Odongo to take over and explain the following. What are the policy angles that needs to be taken into consideration to promote the adaptation of clean cooking technologies? Dr. Faith Odongo, if you're logged in kindly.
Good afternoon.
You can go ahead, Faith. We can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Faith Odongo from Ministry of Energy. And I would like to appreciate this opportunity to share my thoughts about policy considerations on e-cooking. In my presentation, I will be talking about the presentation is not moving. Okay, the content of my presentation I'll introduce and then talk about several issues, including the policy of leaving no one behind, leveraging on existing policies, leveraging on carbon financing, tax incentives, standards and labeling, balancing demand and loads, wiring standards for e-cooking, and awareness, data and innovation, plus a few other considerations. And to start it off, I would just like to observe that Ministry of Energy and Petroleum has managed to heighten the momentum on clean cooking as well as e-cooking. We have listened to the head of state, First Lady and Cabinet Secretary addressing clean cooking in their messages to the public. And this is significant, especially when we look back at the low priority that was given to cooking over the previous years. And our intention is to keep this momentum going with a view to ensuring that the poorest of the poor is able to access clean energy solutions. Now, my comments will mainly focus on SDG 7 and the call to leave no one behind. I believe this is the focus of this discussion for this moment. And that policy of leaving no one behind, I'm suggesting that it should be the overriding policy. And I say this bearing in mind the remarks by our former PS, General Kihalangwa, the retired General Kihalangwa, who was categorical that we need to find solutions for everybody. And there should be no discrimination. For example, we have been looking at solutions that fit low income communities. But I think it is high time we purposed to get everybody to use clean energy, whether you live in the rural areas, whether you are the poorest of the poor. I think it is the right, even according to the Constitution, people have a right to live in a clean environment. So I do hope that with time, we shall be phasing out products that are designed for the poor. Then my second comment is about leveraging on existing policies. And here what I would like to observe is that there is already an initiative by MEX in collaboration with the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum, Kenya Power, African Development Bank, to leverage on the last mile connectivity program to supply a broad range of e-cooking equipment. And the key objective is to stimulate demand for key e-cooking through existing financing mechanisms for electricity access. I believe we will be giving you more details on this initiative as we progress. The discussions are still ongoing and it's not yet formalized or submitted for approval. Thirdly, I would like to talk about leveraging carbon financing to address the needs of the vulnerable. And just to observe that I have been in many international meetings where it is proclaimed that funding for clean cooking is usually a problem. And at the same time, it is also proclaimed that there's a lot of funding out there, which many of us cannot access. And both private sector, civil society, and governments have been grappling with the hassle of getting access to this funding. But we have the opinion that some of this funding can be accessed. For example, the green climate financing, which already has been accessed by Kenya to support the professionalization of the improved cook stoves value chain. We need to make very clear the case of e-cooking to benefit from available carbon financing initiatives. And in addition to that, I would suggest the possibility of creating a fund that supports clean cooking, where e-cooking is of course a component, and suggest channeling of any proceeds or the money that is generated through the process of that carbon financing to support capacity building and to mitigate the high upfront cost of acquiring e-cooking equipment. We would also recommend that the proceeds from carbon financing be plowed back to support the vulnerable communities in accessing e-cooking appliances, and also to support development of capacity across the value chain. Then the next thing I would like to talk about is the tax incentives and tariffs on e-cooking. We do appreciate the progress so far made in making information available on cooking from many corners of those partners that are participating in this process. However, given that the technology in the Kenyan market I'm talking about the comprehensive analysis of tax regimes on electric cooking appliances. And most of these are imported. We need to look at what taxes could affect the access by both the poor and the middle income communities to access this e-cooking equipment. This is in light of the fact that private sector is involved in supply and distribution of products. Probably we could borrow a lesson from the LPG sector in terms of removal of tax on LPG between 1999 and 2018, which resulted in a growth in LPG uptake up to 6 times what it was in 1999. We also need to come up with tax regimes that promote local manufacture of e-cooking appliances with a view to bringing down the cost. The other thing we could learn about tariffs, there's the example of Uganda, which has lessons on designing a tariff to encourage uptake of e-cooking. And they have an e-cooking specific tariff. I'm not sure what could be done in the Kenyan situation, and I believe some of these discussions have already come up when we are talking about e-cooking in other circles. And we would urge that this discussion be taken forward with a view to supporting the promotion of e-cooking within our country. Then I would now come to the standards and labeling of e-cooking equipment. There is a lot that we can borrow from the standards and labeling process under the energy efficiency sector. And we have been able to introduce these labels on certain gadgets within the Kenyan market, and people have been educated and been told that this gadget, which has so many stars, reflects a gadget that is energy efficient to this extent. If we could achieve the same for the electric cooking equipment, I think this would be good for us. But let's purpose to develop standards, local standards for the Kenyan market to support the uptake of electric cooking among our communities. And the absence of these labels on electric cooking equipment needs to be addressed. And it will also require a lot of consumer education and monitoring to see that there is no abuse of the labels that are introduced for this purpose. Then I would now turn to balancing the demands of electric cooking with electricity loads. On this aspect, what I would like to note is that urban centers are prime areas for distributing e-cooking appliances, but they also experience frequent disruption of electricity, some of which results from system overload. Given that e-cooking was not part and parcel of the existing distribution systems, there is need to examine the capacity of the systems to take this additional load. And I'm suggesting that this be coordinated with a view to targeting load centers that are underutilized. Maybe the people in KPLC have got this information on where the load is underutilized, and these should be the target or prime promotion areas for electric cooking. Then regarding the safety for electric cooking, there are issues to do with the wiring standards. We need to enhance the clarity on the minimum standards for wiring that can support electric cooking. I believe there are certain standards that should be met if you are fixing a cooker to an electric supply. And there are certain cables that are required to do this, and certain sockets that are specific sockets. The question I'm asking here is, are there any unique requirements for wiring that need to be addressed as we continue to introduce the wide variety of e-cooking appliances within the Kenyan market? And looking at the informal settlements, how can we support them to be able to take up this equipment without necessarily posing any hazards, because we are aware what happens in informal settlements where there's illegal tapping of electricity supply. What are the dangers of continuing to distribute this equipment when we have not dealt with the safety of the wiring? And what about the cost of doing this? Will it be passed in total to the consumer, or is there some subsidy that can enable this to happen, probably from the government side or in collaboration with the development partners? Then the policy on awareness. There have been wrong perceptions about e-cooking, and I think we are aware of some of them pertaining to the fact that e-cooking is expensive, it causes cancer, it is unsafe, etc. And we need to really educate the public on with respect to diffusing these perceptions, not just among the poor communities, but even the middle incomes and income communities plus the elite. I would say that the BCC strategy that was developed in July this year, that is the behavior change and communication strategy, is a starting point to customize awareness messages on electric cooking and help people understand that electricity is safe and is beneficial to their health, for the environment, and mitigation of the effects of climate change. We need to make use of the data generated from ongoing research to pass on these messages through the e-cooking hubs. This is an intervention, maybe that awareness intervention is something that may go on for a number of years to ensure that the message has sunk properly within the communities, and they are able to resonate with electricity as a clean cooking option. Then in terms of planning, we are looking at the data situation, and the electricity sector in Kenya has been able to expand, partly because of comprehensive data collection that has been employed. We need to get e-cooking to the doorsteps of poor communities, and this requires access to data. For example, the electricity connections, which ones are metered, the levels of income, ability to pay, etc. And this data needs to be consolidated to facilitate the planning process and enable it to feed into other national processes like the integrated national energy planning, and to link to other databases that are being developed separately, like the Energy Access Explorer, and there's another data collection process called osmosis that is supported by the climate compatible growth. Both these two are collaborating with the Ministry of Energy to collect data from the various subsectors within the energy sector and digitize it for easy access. Then I would also now talk about the innovation aspect. I think innovation is in any field is key. And this pertains to support to innovation on the design, testing, production, marketing, and use. We know that business models for electric cooking are still young within our country, and they are evolving also. And we have also discussed the use of e-cooking appliances, especially on the community of practice for electric cooking. But we also need to look at the innovation in the other aspects of design, testing, production, and marketing. Are we able to produce some of these gadgets within the Kenyan market, or are we going to leave it to production to stay in international circles? Then other policy areas for consideration include the reskilling of the population that is currently engaged in cooking solutions that use solid biomass. Whether to focus on households, institutions, SMEs. So far, the discussion has just been on households, but I think there has been an attempt to look at what institutions can do with the electric cooking, what SMEs can do with it, and I believe these discussions need to be taken forward to ensure that all these sectors have the message and they take seriously the effort to convert from the use of wood fuel, because whatever goes into institutions and SMEs is a significant amount of wood in our country. So that switch will be beneficial for the cooking sector. And lastly, with the time, we may need to look at the recycling and reuse of obsolete and unusable equipment, and as well as developing rules and regulations for disposal of this equipment. If you recall, when the electronic equipment use in our country became it became that almost everybody is accessing electronic equipment. There was need to develop a regulation that guides how to dispose of this equipment. For Kenya, I don't know at what stage this will be necessary, but I think as the uptake continues, we need to think about what is it that we are going to do about recycling and reuse of obsolete and unusable equipment. And that is marks the end of my presentation. I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much for allowing me to talk to the participants.
Thank you so much, Dr. Faith, for honoring on the invitation and for such an elaborate and impressive presentation. Just some key takeaway notes from your presentation is that in order to facilitate the extensive uptake of modern energy services in Kenya, there is need for a high political will amongst our politicians. Number two, the fact that we need to leverage on carbon financing. I managed to attend an event during the COP event in Egypt, and one of the things that enabled the cocoa fuel to get a good number of people embracing the technology was the fact that they leveraged on carbon credits. And that is one thing I think, that is one aspect that can really help in the adoption of e-cooking solutions in Kenya. And number three, that we need to create a fund that supports clean cooking, considering that most of the appliances are not affordable to the majority of the people who need the technology. So the need to create funds will be a great deal for this kind of population. Number four, we need tax incentives to promote local manufacturing. As it is, we incur a lot of expenses or cost in purchasing the e-cooking appliances because the tax assigned to these appliances is almost double the price of buying these appliances. So with the local manufacturing, this will help address the issue of cost of these appliances. Last but not least, I'll mention the point that no matter how good a technology is, without proper awareness, its uptake will be inhibited. and thus the need to take this technology to the doorstep of poor people who needs it the most. Thank you for that, Dr. Faith. I could not mention it all of them because of time. And that was such an insightful presentation, and we'll follow up on that conversation. And next in line, we have David Njugi. David Njugi is the East African Regional Representative, Gogla, and also among the board members of the Clean Cooking Association of Kenya. Welcome so much, David Njugi. And now this is your question. Solid biomass is the main driver of deforestation. However, a majority of the current interventions focus more on treating the symptoms as opposed to looking at the underlying causes. What are some of the systemic integrated interventions that can help address the problem, both in terms of restoring what has been degraded, as well as providing alternative clean cooking energy sources? Thank you, David, and you may address the question now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel and the great discussion. Yeah, just trying to get my gadget on. Also, just commenting on what Dr. Faith has mentioned, I think we've come a long way in promoting and highlighting, this cooking agenda, electric cooking being one of them. And there has been reasons or whether they're institutional or legal policy that have hindered the adoption of clean cooking in Kenya over time. From the first speaker, looking at the health, environment, and quantifying the losses that including loss of life. I think the last data we have from the Ministry of Health is that close to 21,000 people die annually because of air pollution, and this is mainly because of the way they light and cook their houses, in their houses. We need to quantify these and then to take relevant policy interventions. And I think Dr. Faith has elaborated on the key policy issues that need to be taken. And I think just emphasizing on one, there's need to have or to take an integrated approach to energy planning. That means we include clean cooking as part of it. I know this is happening, under the SETA project and other initiatives where there is a deliberate effort to include clean cooking in the county plans and in the integrated national plans. So that is needed. That has not been there for a while. I know there are also other initiatives. There's the e-cooking strategy, among other strategies that are being developed in the sector to identify and then come up with a roadmap, with a pathway towards adoption of clean cooking in the country. And there are ways that there are things we can learn from what has happened in the past. I think LPG, the way LPG has grown in terms of adoption, the fact that there was a predictable policy environment for quite a while. I'm not sure whether it was close to 10 years, there's VAT exemption, duty, and then that was predictable. And investors came in and put in money and, created a whole distribution network that is serving the sector pretty well. In the last census, I think LPG had grown from almost around 5% to 21% of households using, 23.9% of households using LPG. How can we do that for other technologies, bioethanol, electric cooking, and others, biogas? What policy issues do we need to? We need a predictable policy environment. That is very key for private sector to invest. If you're providing incentives, which are needed, because majority of the people who are using very dirty fuels are actually the poor and the vulnerable. We need to give incentives for the sector to invest, but also for consumers to adopt these, together with what we've talked about, awareness. Support to innovators. I think Dr. Faith has also highlighted that, because there's still quite a bit of innovation that is needed in the technologies, in the business models. We've now seen PEGO being integrated in electric cooking appliances. And then hopefully that will help, similar to what that has helped in the adoption of off-grid solar appliances. That will help in making these appliances accessible and affordable, especially to those poor rural communities. And of course, last but not least, creating that awareness. And I think highlighting the environmental impact is key. Apart from the health, the environmental impact, and what adopting clean cooking can really help in supporting our reforestation efforts, protecting the environment in that sense, and maybe also integrating as part of these plans, integrating planting of trees, which seems to be a very passionate theme for the current administration. As we implement these projects as a way of making up for the deforestation that has happened. And I would say, taking that even further to the small and medium enterprises, restaurants, and even industries who are also huge consumers of biomass. We can leverage on existing sector value chains, like seem to be quite some value chains such as the off-grid solar companies that have extended their services to the last mile, and see how do we make it attractive for them to integrate, and or partnerships to provide these services and these appliances to the poor or the rural communities that they are also serving. There's a whole distribution network. How do we bring these companies together, or how do we make electric cooking appliances, for example, attractive to off-grid solar companies, that they adopt them and then add them to the many other appliances that they are providing to households. They're doing TVs, they're doing refrigeration units and all that. How can we make it attractive for them to adopt? And integrating PEGO technology into these is one way, but we also need to make these appliances also affordable. I think you've talked about funding, and I would just emphasize that looking at cooking and where we are at the moment, that more than 70% of households are still using biomass to cook. If there is no also public support and funding to the sector, then it will be very difficult to achieve the targets that we have set ourselves. And by public funding, which can come in different ways, government direct funding, and I know there are some initiatives around that. There's one for LPG, there's biogas programs, but also partnering with development partners to do this. Whether it's resource-based financing, we've talked about carbon credits, and coordinating all that, and also that technical support that is needed to facilitate the ecosystem, whether it's training of technicians, whether it's creating awareness. That is a role that the public sector needs to take up and really play a great role to it. So I think a lot has been said by Dr. Faith, and I think if we integrate all these together and make sure that the roadmap that we're coming or developing is clear on timelines, it's clear on what we want to achieve, and there is public, political support and policy support that accompanies it, not just statements, because we've been talking about this for years, but also intentional policy support to the sector is very much needed to attract investments, to drive down the prices of components, to attract localization, what you're talking about, whether it's local assembly of these units, which will help in, even accessibility of parts to repair some of these appliances and all that. But that can only happen if there's good demand, there is a good market, basically, that private sector, can plug in and invest in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for your elaborate presentation. We have noticed that we have come a long way in the promotion of clean cooking, and we have captured quite a lot that you've said in that area. The hindrance of this adaptation of clean cooking has come from funding, and that has been pointed out from the very first speaker. And we are looking at ways on how we can bridge the funding gap to be able to adapt the clean cooking space. And another thing that you pointed out on your talk is the affordability of the appliances that are available in the market. This can be bridged from your talk that this can be bridged with adaptation of innovation, where we have local made appliances. They might be a little bit cheaper from the talk you've had. Our next speaker is Mary Bege from Makueni. Mary, the floor is yours, kindly. The question for Mary will be, wood fuel energy is a big source of livelihood and income for significant majority of people who don't have an alternative source of livelihood. So even as we are thinking about transitioning to clean cooking, what are some of the alternative sources of livelihood that may help generate income for people who have been displaced from that particular sector? Mary? Kindly mute, Mary, you're muted. Kindly mute, unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Paul, Emily, and the rest of the ARIN team. I am very glad to be here for this very important topic that we're talking about. So my name is Mary Mbenge. I'm actually the outgoing Chief Officer for Environment and Climate Change in Makueni County. And I want to recognize my brother, Engineer Josephat Musyoki, who is the also outgoing Chief Officer for Energy, and the person who's really mentored me in a lot, especially in matters of renewable energy, which we are trying to transform the county into a more green growth mode of way. Well, to discuss the topic that have been given, I want to give a small background on most of the people that tend to use the wood fuel, especially because their livelihoods depend on it. So majority of these households are like their livelihoods are forest-based or nature-based, to be precise, where you find most households from early morning to late evening depend on extracts from nature. That is in terms of fuel, wood, water, and very many other natural resources. So when we look at most of the people that accrue wood fuel, you and I, we can agree you might be using a source of wood fuel or not, and this depends actually on your economic um, um, upbringing or your economic view. You'll find majority of the rural folk are the ones that depend on forest-based livelihoods, and this is because most of this, if you sample them, you'll find they have a low wealth category. Most of them are not very well educated, and they are kind of the farmers and not very wealthy category. When we look at most of the ones that use value added products from of fuel wood, then we turn into looking at most of the urban um, dwellers, like the kind of middle wealth sort of people, where now we look at people using, charcoal and all that. So it's also important that we also get to think about this in another way, where we can look at the gender dynamics of forest-based communities or rural-based communities, so that in this discussion we can be able to tease out extraction intensities of their livelihood decisions. So they are either, female-headed or male-headed, or duties that are male or female. And you see all those institutional characteristics, depending on the gender, will enable access to some of the livelihoods that we are talking about. So it could include also access to some of the commodities that one of our panelists has talked about, like agricultural markets, credit extension, membership to some forest user groups, because you find in some rural communities like in Ukambani, most of the like honey-based user groups are male dominated. They're not very much female, because this was traditionally seen as a non-female based livelihood. So the increasing likelihood of household extracting higher value products, then you can see is dependent on that gender dynamic. Then I would also like to say that despite the fact that our carbon sequestration is not very much linked to a mitigation aspect in terms of using wood fuel, then it would be nice, or it would be prudent, to actually divert this kind of livelihood option to a more renewable energy, or to more clean-based cooking alternatives. And so for that, I would encourage, first of all, those policies that Dr. Faith talked about, so that people feel free and can be able to go into accessing, products linking communities to develop some of the markets, those credit facilities, and perhaps even, extracting higher value products or adding value to some of these products. Also, accessing sales, doing sales, accessing markets, and, various varied agricultural products. So it will be good if we can, highlight here some of these livelihood options that we can be able to front to our people, so that instead of using like the wood fuel, which is actually a very extractive kind of use in the forest. I'm talking about charcoal and basically firewood, but more importantly, charcoal, because you find for example, Makueni, where we've been able to sample some of this methods, is that charcoal from Makueni comes from the highly indigenous tree species, like the acacia species. And you find these indigenous species are the ones that are more preferred. You know, you find someone going to the local market and kind of asking, do you have the charcoal that is indigenous? Unajua, uko na makaa ya kienyeji, because this is what is indicated like a better quality charcoal product than the others. And so for that, you see indigenous trees take very, very long to grow, some even up between 30 to 50 years. And so, and there are no efforts, many efforts in replanting some of this. And we would also, I would also like to mention here that some of these are accrued actually from conservation areas, protected areas like the Savos and the Chulu hills, and along, many, many rivers. So there's no much in a replanting effort. And right now it has really changed the landscape. If you look at some GIS photos or some satellite photos, you can see there's a really, really huge difference from what happened like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and what is happening here in terms of the landscape. So it's high time that we embraced other, switching people to other alternative livelihood options, like, putting up enterprises like, or groups, grouping farmers, having membership to farmer groups, first of all, or user groups, and then they can be able to do projects like wild vegetable collection, where there's an agreement with some of this organization like KFS, KWS, and even private conservancies, to let people, collect some of these wild vegetables, which are slow foods and are very nutritious, wild fruits as well, and invest in actually putting this up, because I know of wild fruits that have
Hi,
really,
Mary.
yes.
Sorry for the interruption. Can you kindly increase your volume?
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes, it is.
It is.
And in 1 minute, we can wind up, Mary. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And so honey or beekeeping can be one of the alternative methods, snail farming or butterfly farming, mushroom farming, and even, farming of, collection of, flowers like the orchids and saplings that for trees that can be sold. So in terms of charcoal processing, there are some foods that we cannot escape the charcoal production, but we can build kilns to reduce wood wastage and emissions that cause air pollution, and we can have better produced charcoal and that uses less wood. Another one would be, the energy saving jikos, which has been highlighted, and we can create jobs with production and fabrication of liners, the metal casings, and even installations to people's homes. We can use different types of material like charcoal dust, briquettes, cow dung, organic waste like from maize cobs, soil. And this can be very good, especially for institutions that accrue a lot of firewood and a lot of charcoal, like schools and offices. So I would really encourage this kind of alternative livelihoods, and even more so value chains that accrue through them, like compost making, pesticides making, plant growth regulator making, livestock.
We'll continue. I think Mary, oh, she's back. Mary, your final words?
Hello, Emily. I believe I just ended there. Hello, Emily.
Thank you, Mary, for that wonderful presentation. Yeah. So one or two highlights from your presentation is the fact that majority of households depend on nature-based extracts from the soil, something that builds a lot of pressure on the forest resources, and thus the need to have policies that have policies that encourage alternative sources of income generating opportunities. And some of the opportunities that those in the rural areas can engage in include beekeeping, butterfly farming, or the flower collection. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. Just to pick some questions before we go to the next presenter, Andrew Amadi. A question from Andrew is asking if we can have some of the electricians trained. And I believe this question is directed to Faith, Dr. Faith, who presented on that aspect. Dr. Faith, kindly respond to the same.
Just a moment, I get to the question. You are saying training electricians. Of course, this is something that needs to be considered because, okay, I think there's a program for capacity building on this, but I don't know who is responsible. I may not really give you the facts on what is happening on training of electrical staff. But this is something that needs to be considered, and capacity building, as I mentioned in my presentation, is a key factor, both for offering the services of wiring and also for doing the after sales, whatever services and repair of electrical equipment that we are using for cooking. All those are necessary. So that is part of the consideration that can be put forward in terms of taking the e-cooking forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Faith, for the response. Moving to our final speaker, we have Tom Randa, who is the MEX Kenya Project Officer. Welcome so much, Tom. In 5 minutes, how can the ambitious 2028 clean cooking target be achieved? While various strategies have been developed, they have either not explicitly incorporated household cooking as among the potential sectors that can greatly help in the reduction of emissions or solutions, given that given are not straightforward. Kindly address the question. Welcome, Tom.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Emily, and glad to be invited to be part of the panelist. In addressing this particular question, how can the ambitious 2028 clean cooking target be achieved, and this specifically for Kenya? I think the first step is by the government having this ambition itself. And overall, by accelerating all the actions towards the target. But just how do we accelerate all actions towards this particular target? I think there are several ways, and one of them is enabling environment. The enabling environment is mostly spearheaded by the national government and the county government. And in this, I think Dr. Faith has elaborated on some of the areas that can be tackled to ensure an enabling environment is achieved. And these are through strategic policies, both at the national government and the county government level, strategies, and all that. All these geared towards creating an enabling environment for accelerating the achievement of the clean cooking target. And all these requires the good political goodwill or political goodwill for a sustainable clean cooking transition. So for achievement of all these enabling environment, looking at the supply side, the demand side, and protecting the citizen at all levels requires the political goodwill and the legal instruments. The second way of achieving this particular target is through strengthening the supply chain. So in the entire supply chain of clean cooking, we have several facets that must be strengthened. And for example, if you look at the clean cooking technologies, such as the e-cooking technologies, you look at the clean cooking fuels and energy, making them available and affordable, but at the same time protecting or creating more livelihood sources in the entire supply chain is critical. And I think some of them have been mentioned through the previous speakers. So exploring and strengthening the supply chain in clean cooking is key. Another way is stimulating demand and behavioral change. Cooking is highly culturalized or driven socially, so it varies from one portion or one sector or one community to another. It even varies from one household to another. So stimulating the demand at a household level or at an institutional level, it should not be generalized. Campaigns towards behavioral change, not cultural change, is key. And therefore, providing incentives for the end users so that they can transit or transition to clean cooking technologies is critical. Why should I leave what I've been used to all along and have been comfortable with it to the new technology, so the clean technology? So some incentives towards stimulating demand and behavioral change is key. Empowering champions through the local communities and the hubs, the clean cooking hubs that are currently being instituted across the country is critical. For example, for me to adopt a clean cooking technology, I can easily adapt it when I associate my close networks using it. So it's easier for me to adopt and use it. So stimulating demand should be devolved even to the local level. Awareness and behavioral change campaigns, I think this has been stressed even from the first presenter, starting with Jonathan and Faith and the rest of us. Another way of stimulating actions to achieve this target is by integrating efforts in climate change, air quality, energy, and clean cooking space. So historically, these segments have been operating or have been looked independently, and efforts from different stakeholders have been disaggregated. For example, when we talk about climate change in the past, clean cooking was not featuring anywhere. And when we talk about air quality to some extent, especially the indoor air pollution, all these sectors were operating differently, but it's coming to shape that most of these efforts are being consolidated. When we talk about our NDCs as a nation, air pollution and the greenhouse gas emissions, climate change adaptation and mitigations, they are all coming together so that the end result can help us achieve the targets. As we achieve the targets set for climate change, we also achieve the targets set for clean cooking and air quality management. Another point, which might be the second last, is the multi-level or multi-stakeholder approach of collaboration and partnerships. So across scales, vertically or horizontally, we need to have champions, even in the national government, in the policy making space, in the research space, but also at the local communities, so that these technology service providers, so that all these stakeholders can work together, partner to help us achieve this target. Deliberate mass transition and institutions transition. For us to achieve the target, we need to have a plan on how to get most institutions and most household transition. It's bad news that most of the institutions, for example, high schools in Kenya, still rely on biomass for their cooking to the students. And this can be targeted as one of the institutional transition pathway. So institutional and household clean cooking transition campaigns, initiatives, projects, and programs can be promoted. And last is monitoring, developing a monitoring framework to improve, to allow continuous improvement, monitoring and adjustment. So as we move towards the target 2028, we don't need to wait until 2028, then we do the evaluation. We need to maybe evaluate yearly if possible, or after some time, so that we know what we are doing good, where we are, and how to adjust the gears so that we achieve the 2028 target. So in concluding, and maybe going back to the question, how can the ambitious 2028 clean cooking target be achieved? I can say it's by deliberate and targeted efforts by the government, and I mean both levels of government and all partners, covering all the clean cooking value chain. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tom, for such an insightful response to the question and for keeping the 5-minute time. A few takeaway points is that we have to have an enabling environment that is supposed to be spearheaded primarily by the national and county governments with the support of other partners and stakeholders, and also they need to have a political goodwill for sustainable cooking transition. And last but not least, they need to empower champions in the local communities whom other members can relate to when they talk about this or such technologies. So at this moment, I'll give room for 1 or 2 questions before we go to the parting shot from our panelists. So anyone with any burning question, you can just unmute and ask a question, and you can direct it to any of the panelists. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Sarah.
Yes, I'm Sarah Quach, and just have maybe a comment and a question, yeah? Like mostly clean cooking, the major challenge has been maybe the cost, the upfront the cost of buying the systems. And you see many private sectors have done a lot of things to ensure that affordability is encountered. For example, through pay-as-you-go model. Okay, now the consumers are happy, but then you find that when I was doing some exercises, most of them, the private sectors were telling us like they are now giving the pay-as-you-go model. People are able to afford most of their systems, but then that you find that the tax, they are charged upfront tax on sale. How can you make these people be motivated so that they are not discouraged on the tax, more so in terms of sustaining their business and not affecting the profit margin of their business? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for your question. Anyone with another question before our panelists respond to the question? If there's no question at the moment, any of the panelists kindly feel free to respond to the question that has been raised by Sarah. Dr. Faith, would you mind responding to the question?
Sorry, I got back onto the whatever earphones when she was halfway. Can you just summarize for me what the question was about? Hello?
Sarah, okay, it's okay. Sarah, I was asking that cost is a major challenge to the uptake of these energy efficient, like clean cooking technologies. While we have systems like pay-go, most of them, there's a tax that comes with it, which still prohibits the uptake of the same. So how can these issues be addressed to facilitate uptake? Thank you.
I think this links back to the point I made when I was making my presentation regarding what is the tax regime on clean cooking appliances in the Kenyan market. I don't think anybody has gone to the pain of doing an analysis to see the kind of taxes that are loaded onto this equipment, even those which are distributed under the pay-go systems and all that, all those other arrangements. We require, I think, some more data to do the analysis of the taxes and make specific recommendations, because it will not just happen. Somebody needs to bring out the facts, because when the Ministry of Energy is making a case for tax removal, we need to have hard facts that we present to back up the argument. But the ministry has got that. We normally do tax review requests to the National Treasury. So if we get that kind of hard information obtained through an authentic study, then we can use that information to lobby for tax removal. But you know, Treasury is usually focusing at generating revenue. So that analysis needs to demonstrate what is the win-win situation. How can we remove the taxes, but also enable government to generate revenue in a different way? So there has to be that balance between the tax removal and revenue generation. That's what I could say. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Dr. Faith, for your response. I believe, Sarah, your queries have been addressed. Now, I just have one last question for all our panelists. In 1 minute, as we conclude, before we have the remarks from our director, in 1 minute, what are some of the programs that can accelerate the transition to clean cooking technologies? I'll start with Jonathan, kindly.
Sure, thanks for that, and thanks for hosting this, and thanks to all the speakers for what's been a really insightful session. I think there's, as I tried to highlight when I was talking earlier, there are numerous opportunities, I think, within the clean cooking sector to help accelerate it, but they are all focused, in different areas, and it's important, and we've heard a lot today about building that enabling environment to understand which areas of the sector that we need to build and we need to focus on. One of the programs that I work on, the Transforming Energy Access program, it's looking to try and accelerate innovation and technologies and business models that are going to be attractive, are going to be investable, and that people are going to want to put their money into to help grow the sector as quickly as possible. And then I think, in addition to that, how are we going to build programs that some of which are already out there around results-based financing or other forms of concessional capital? I think we need to ensure that those are as successful as possible to really highlight and demonstrate the results of those to the market, to show that there is an opportunity, there is impact, so that we can continue to grow the sector as fast as possible when it comes to access to finance.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your response. David, kindly, in 1 minute. If David is not here, Mary, can you kindly respond to the question in 1 minute?
Thank you very much. I would like to just say it's important to create a lot of awareness and to train people, especially on alternative energy sources, and also to have better cooking methods, clean ones, and also to promote peer-to-peer learning through benchmarking with institutions that have made more progress in this particular sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. David, in 1 minute.
Thank you. So I think to accelerate this transition, policy support is needed. And I think Faith has highlighted that it's not been there before, but with policy support that is deliberate, intentional, supporting the sector, the whole value chain, I think the moment we have very clear, the way we have a very clear agenda on solar, for example, on how to promote wind, if we do that, then I think we will go a long way. Implement those strategies. The behavior change campaign needs to be, continued, and then for a long time, integrating, clean cooking in the county energy plans, the national energy plans. Those intentional, deliberate interventions will really go a long way in easing transition, making these things affordable, and creating a market that private sector can serve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Tom, in 1 minute.
Thank you, Emily. I think there exist several opportunities that can already be tapped into. There's already good political will from the Ministry of Energy, that's the national government, and most of the county governments in Kenya. And therefore, maybe through an initiative or a program such as the Modern Energy Cooking Services, where 4 hubs have been established in Kenya to promote clean cooking and specifically e-cooking, these can be upgraded or spread across every county. There's another project or initiative called the Sustainable Energy Technical Assistance by the Ministry of Energy, again, supported by the EU. I think this can also be an avenue so that clean cooking are integrated in the county energy plans and also the integrated national energy plan. Campaigns and awareness can be enhanced so that people know and change behaviors on how they cook and the energies they use. The CIDPs by the counties are being, I think most of them are being developed or finalized. So this is also an opportunity which can be leveraged on so that clean cooking gets into the county plans. Apart from that, I think it's all partners to join hands and support the initiative to have the targets achieved by 2028. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tom, for that. Because of time, I will want to welcome our director, Dr. Johannes, for his final remarks and closing of the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful discussion. These conversations are very critical when you talk about clean energy transformation. And this is because, you get to build a collective momentum that tries to understand the challenges that we face, but most importantly, how to, find solutions, not just for clean energy, but clean energy which is proper, because that is the biggest gap that we face today in the world. The biggest gap in clean energy is not because there is no access or there's no availability of technologies. Technologies continue to emerge, whether in the clean cooking space or industrial space. But the biggest issue is the exclusion of a big cadre of people, the poor, from accessing these particular technologies. That is where the problem is. I mean, the market is rich with a lot of ideas and many things that could promote clean energy. So the big question we have today, as we even look at the SDG 7, is how do we make clean energy interventions pro-poor? And from what I've heard from the panelists is that clean cooking becomes one of those entry points that are very critical in terms of beginning to revolutionize the clean the clean energy agenda. So clean cooking is an entry point. And clean cooking is important because everybody cooks, and you go to the villages, you go to institutions, everybody cooks. So it's a phase, or it's a platform where everybody interacts with energy. And from what I've heard from the panelists, again, as I conclude and close the session, is that there are various facets to clean cooking as an entry point to clean energy transformation. There is the business model and the financial aspects. There is the aspects around clean cooking and being part of a nature-based solution. There is the wider policy aspects that Faith Odongo has highlighted. There is, the wider kind of community, or the poor or different segments of the community who are, expected to access clean cooking as part of the energy transformation. So what we are seeing here is the aspect that clean cooking is an integrated issue, and therefore, if we are going to move forward and ensure that we use that niche to transform clean energy in the globe, not only in Kenya or in Africa, we have to see clean cooking as an integrated issue. We have to begin to see clean cooking as a developmental issue. So as a community, we've been having these engagements through the modern energy cooking platform, the Elect e-cooking. How do we begin to start thinking about clean cooking as a developmental issue? What are the things that we need to bring on board, or we need to link in to ensure that we actually address clean cooking in a way that touches issues that really impedes the poor from accessing clean energy technologies? And of course, these issues are income. So how can clean cooking be a source of job creation? We're talking about health issues. Of course, it's very clear how clean cooking, can be, linked to health. That's very, fundamental, and we've heard about that. So these are the questions moving forward as we try to really see how much we've achieved in SDG 17. Is how do we work together as a people, as a community of practice that is passionate about clean energy? How do we work together to ensure that we frame, the opportunities provided by clean cooking in a more integrated way? We begin to discuss the options beyond cooking, that will be able to meet the aspirations of the poor. How do we decolonize technologies to ensure that they are pro-poor? How do we decolonize financial models, to ensure that, these models are responding to the actual aspirations of the poor? So these are the fundamental questions that we are going to continue in this particular conversation. As I always say, this is just the beginning of this conversation, because I think we've had quite a number of discussions and we are moving on. And I think with the discussions, there are a number of good things, good opportunities, good solutions that are emerging. And we, from the Africa Research and Impact Network, we want to commit that this is something that we are passionate about, to ensure that we continuously bring people together to be able to find not just collective solutions, but solutions that respond to the needs of the most vulnerable segments of the community. So we are talking about the poor in this case. And with that, that is basically, that links to the overall theme of this particular conference, which is about just transition. It was about justice. How can energy bring justice to the people? How can we avoid injustices that clean energy pursuit has basically netted on many vulnerable and poor communities. And with that, we are beginning our main session for the conference this afternoon from 3 p.m. today. And I want to request and encourage all of you who have participated in this session. We thank you so much for that, to be able to find time to join. I hope the link for registering and joining has been posted on the chat. So please check that out, join, and so that we can contribute to this conversation. We can look deep, in terms of, are we doing justice? Are we doing justice? All the things that we are pursuing with regards to clean energy, with regards to other sectors. Are we doing justice to the vulnerable and the marginalized? And how can we do better moving forward? And with those very few remarks, allow me to say thank you so much to all the participants. I know it's Christmas time, and there has been so many meetings this year. Some of us, we have just come from the COP, and there has been so many. We just finished the Clean Cooking Week for Kenya, and there has been very enormous discussions. We are really finishing the year very strong, but I want to thank you for taking your time to be part of this conversation, and we look forward to having many more like this in the coming days. So thank you very much, and let me take this opportunity also to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a very happy new 2023. Thanks so much. Back to you, Emmy. I guess we want to take a group photo. Aaron, is that possible? All right, Emmy, you can coordinate that. Thanks.
Yeah, that would be great. If you are up to it, kindly put on your video for the last group photo. On the count of 1, 2, 3. Thank you so much, and thank you for your time. We do not take it for granted, and may we continue this conversation in our various platforms. Be blessed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.